All right, welcome everybody. As you know, I'm going to do my introduction of the course. As a reminder, the course is, people watch it on video and they don't watch all of the sessions, so we always like to talk about the purposes of the course before we begin. I'll do that, then I will introduce the topic and the speakers. So just to remind you, I'm Deborah Satz. I'm the instructor for the class along with Paul Brest. I'm a philosophy professor and Paul is a emeriti law professor, and we are teaching this class for the second time. Since the class is up for public viewing, I'm going to talk about the purposes of the class once again. So what's the purpose of the class? Deep disagreement pervades democracy, our democracy, from arguments over immigration, taxation, foreign policy, reparations, and the Mideast crisis, to the function of elite higher education and the value of free speech itself. As I've stressed, and we've stressed, disagreement by itself is not a cause for concern. We should expect that in a democratic society, one ruled not by a king or an autocrat, that is, a society based on the equal freedom and status of its members, reasonable people will disagree about many things. Some of the deepest questions we face about morality, religion, value, they're hard to think through. Even people who are well-motivated and conscientious will answer questions pertaining to these matters in different ways, maybe because they have different life experiences or because the facts are hard to pin down and admit of different interpretations, because they will make different trade-offs among competing values. As I like to say, disagreement is a feature of democratic societies and not a bug. But not all disagreement is productive. Some people fail to consider inconvenient facts and close their minds to evidence and reasoning that doesn't support their view. Sometimes, and all too frequently, a culture of incivility prevails with respect to those with whom we disagree. Note that by incivility, I'm not talking about politeness. I'm talking about the failure to treat other people with respect simply because they hold different views on matters that we care about. And such incivility is all around us. We need a better kind of public discussion. But it's not only all around us in public, it's also especially a concern for a university whose mission is the pursuit of knowledge and truth, and the pursuit of these goals of knowledge, of truth, depends on the free exchange of ideas and an openness to question received opinions. History shows us how often we get things wrong, even when we're trying to figure out the truth, and it's because we feel this mission, the pursuit of knowledge, is under attack and stress from forces both inside and outside the university that Paul and I decided to launch this class. Okay, so that's the purpose of the class. If the students could take a moment and fill out the QR code to confirm their attendance, that would be much appreciated. So just take a minute. And then I'm going to introduce the topic of today's discussion, which fits with all the things I've just been talking about. So a great deal is happening in our national landscape as initiatives around diversity, equity, and inclusion have been the subject of intense scrutiny and executive orders, something we didn't anticipate when we set up this course and this topic. But today we want to step away from the issues of external regulation and ask, how should we ourselves, independent of external pressures, think about initiatives around diversity, equity, and inclusion? On the one hand, although we're a cooperative species, a quick run through human history should be enough to convince you that we continue to struggle to live together on terms of mutual respect, and that perceived differences of color, ideology, religion, nationality can become axes of exclusion and intolerance. What, if anything, do efforts at diversity, equity, and inclusion do to address our hopes for an inclusive and respectful community? Are they helpful? Are they harmful? Are they irrelevant? And how does efforts at diversity and inclusion relate to other important values, such as freedom of speech and expression? How do we move ourselves to be and to model the respectful evidence community that we want to be? To think through these issues, we have three wonderful guests, each of whom will speak for about 10 minutes. Brian Lowry is the Kenneth Kirkpatrick Professor of Organizational Behavior at Stanford's Business School. He's a social psychologist, also a shoemaker, who examines the ways that social identity shapes our understanding, both of ourselves and of others. His wonderful book, The Creation of You, was published in 2023, and he also co-directs Stanford's Institute for Advancing Just Societies. Eboo Patel is the founder and president of Interfaith America. His organization aims to unlock the potential strengths of America's religious diversity. He's the author of numerous books on faith, diversity, and democracy, and he holds a doctorate in the sociology of religion from Oxford, where he was also a Rhodes Scholar. Finally, Ivan Marinovich is also a professor in Stanford's School of Business, trained in accounting and financial economics. His research focuses on issues of disclosure and optimal standards in finance. At the GSB, he's advocated for free speech and the inclusion of a wide view of perspectives. In particular, he's been a critic of intellectual orthodoxy and groupthink, which has led him to question at least some of the efforts around DEI. So with that, I'm going to, if we could put up the question, and if students could, members of the audience could answer, give their answer to the question. We're polling, are campus DEI initiatives beneficial to college students and the campus community? If you could respond, and once your responses are up, we will begin with Brian. So thank you.
All right.
You can sit or you can go to the podium.
No, I'll sit.
Okay.
Is that so? I should just say that that question to me seems shockingly narrow. That even the way you set up the conversation, what we're talking about is living in a society that is by definition diverse. And how do we make that work? So I'm not going to talk so much about the DEI initiatives on campuses in particular, although I think the comments I'll make will be relevant to those initiatives, and I think my colleagues might speak more on the particulars of those initiatives. So first, I think when you have a conversation or there's disagreement, often you can be talking about different things, in which case the disagreement is not productive. So I think it's useful to be clear about your terms. Like when you have a conversation, what are you talking about? And DEI, I think, has become a political slogan. And I think it's, as such, it's not very useful. So I want to be clear when I talk about DEI, what I'm talking about. So I'm going to go through the acronym and be clear here in what I'm talking about when I say DEI. So diversity, I think, I take that just as a statement of fact, right? The campus is diverse. The societies we live in are diverse. That is just the nature of the world we live in. There's no conversation, I think, that denies that. No one here, I think, on this stage or in this room would question the fact that the societies we live in, the rooms we're in right now, is diverse. The next two things now become a little bit more controversial for some people. Equity, in particular, has become a flashpoint because there are different ideas about what equity means. So let me be clear here. When I think of equity as a social psychologist, it is a term of art. By that I mean it has a very particular definition. The definition of equity in social psychology is equivalence of ratios of inputs and outputs. That means if I put in a certain amount of effort, given my outcome, if you put in the same amount of effort, your outcome should be the same. If I suffer some penalty because I have not put in effort and you don't put in effort, you should suffer the same penalty. So it's an equivalence in the ratio of inputs outputs. Now, I think most people would consider this just fairness. I don't think most people would challenge this idea of equity. Now, people have other views of equity. They use it in all different kinds of ways, and you can have a different view, and we can talk about those. But when I talk about equity, that is what I have in mind, okay? So I think of it as a basic way of describing what most people would accept as fairness. Now, finally, inclusion. By inclusion, I mean that everyone in a given community should have access to the communal goods that are produced by that community, right? So what does that mean? That means that in a society like the United States, you should have access to leisure because leisure is a product of the communal, it's a communal creation. The roads that you drive on, the education that's produced, these things that the economy produces that you participate in, you should have access to. Now, this does not necessarily mean that everyone has the same outcomes. It just means that when we produce common goods, the society produces them, that we should have access to them. As an example, I would argue that the fact that we don't all have access to health care is a significant problem. I think of that as a failure of the society. Okay, so that is a communal good. It's something that we should all have access to. Okay, now assume that most people on the stage agree with most of these things. Again, diversity as a statement of fact, equity as I think a pretty simple statement as I defined it of fairness, and inclusion, which we may have some disagreement about. Now, DE&I, as a pursuit of those two goals and an acceptance of that fact, what does that look like? Here, let's be clear, that looks like the 13th Amendment. That looks like the 14th Amendment. That looks like the 19th Amendment. That looks like Brown v. Board of Education, right? So we talk about these things, these initiatives, these ideas about what it is right now are very limited. It's incredibly narrow. Like many of you in this room right now would not be in this room without a number of the initiatives that I just laid out. Okay, so we can put aside affirmative action and just go back to what is now enshrined in our Constitution and think about that as diversity, equity, and inclusion, a recognition that people not like us deserve access to the benefits associated with being in this society because they contribute to the society, right? So the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery, the 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship, which is now also being challenged, the 19th Amendment, the right for women to vote, right? These things are all about diversity, equity, inclusion. I think it's important to keep in mind that our society functions in large part because we have accepted these basic tenets of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, it's also important to realize that at every point, each of these initiatives were challenged much more than what we're now talking about. The challenges to all these things were intense at the time. Like there was a war to get the 13th and 14th Amendment. Women did not get the right to vote until the 1920s. And as far back as 1970, married women couldn't have a bank account without their husband's signature, right? This is what the world could look like. You think about, envision the world without DE&I initiatives, okay? Now, of course, these issues are complex. As what we're talking about today are particular initiatives, and by initiatives, what I want to be clear about is specific policies. And I think that the scale of the problems associated with living in a diverse society are such that they require disagreement, right? The solutions are going to be complex because the scale and the complexity of the problems are such that there's not easy answers to these problems, right? And so what we're talking about when there's disagreement, the disagreement is about the particular initiatives, particular policies. And let me be clear, like I don't agree with all the particular initiatives or all the particular policies, but we should not lose sight of the fact that at worst what we can say is some current DEI initiatives are failed solutions. They are not the problem. The problem is how do we live together in an incredibly diverse society where everyone is respected, right? That is the problem. Now, solutions, some of those solutions are good to those problems, some of those solutions are bad, and without serious conversation, we can't identify what solutions are going to be most effective. So I think that is what the conversation today is about to me. Now, I think that often when we see these problems, the solutions that are offered are ones of civility or ones of let's talk about it and let everyone's voice be heard. I think, and this is now my personal opinion, that approach is, as I'll just say, this is, I guess, a charitable way of saying it, ahistoric. And by that I mean, it is rarely the case that serious problems that entail power and entail exclusion are solved simply by having people sit down and discuss it. This is just not how the world, I mean, history does not suggest that's how the world works. That human beings are tribal. As a social psychologist, I think that is a fundamental feature of humanity. We are tribal. You see who your people are, however that is defined, and you cling to that group. You support that group. You try to maintain the benefits, the prerogatives of that group. You don't just give it up because you decide, oh, I'm going to be a better person. That is nonsense. That is a story, that is a revisionist story we tell ourselves once things have gotten better, right? And as an example, desegregation wasn't simply a matter of like people deciding that they were being bad people and deciding to do the right thing. No, like there's all sorts of analysis of that could suggest as an example that it could be a response to international pressures on the United States. Furthermore, in desegregation, 1954, Brown v. Board is decided. When are schools actually integrated? What does that tell you about hearts and minds? Right? So I believe that if you want a change in terms of the way diversity is managed, what you need to change are not hearts and minds, are behaviors. That even as a psychologist, I am a psychologist, I think the idea that attitudes shift behavior is backwards. You change behaviors and you change attitudes. So if you want to change behaviors, you change policies. You change policies and procedures. And when people behave in different ways, when they engage in different behaviors, then their attitudes shift. Now, it's easy from that to get to this idea in a revisionist way that the attitude shift preceded the behavioral change. And again, I think a look at history would suggest that is just not true. Now, are the particular policies of DE&I as we understand them today, whatever that means to you, the particular initiatives, and I think, again, when we say we're against those initiatives, we need to be clear what that means. What is it that we're against? If you're against those initiatives, that's fine. And I think it's important to understand a distinction between being against the initiatives because you think they're ineffective. This is where I feel like there could be empirical evidence, you could have rationale for that, completely reasonable to be against any number of initiatives because you think they're ineffective at solving the problem. And there's other people who are against it simply because they don't want the world to change. Right? They don't want the world to change. Now, from my position, I have a bigger problem with the people who don't want the world to change because I think there are significant problems still. But people who just don't think they're effective, I think there's many conversations that we can have about that. Like there are initiatives right now that I am opposed to. So I don't know that there's necessarily disagreement until I know what the initiative is we're talking about. And so for that reason, I think it's really important to identify very clearly what the principles are you're fighting for, what the principles are you believe in, and what the policy or the initiative is that you're for or against and why, right? How does it violate the principle or the goal that you're trying to achieve? And at that point, I think it's important to have a reasonable conversation, a serious conversation where there's civil disagreement. So I'll stop there.
All right. Afternoon, everyone. My name is Ibu Patel. I am the founder and president of an organization called Interfaith America. Just happens to be one of the largest diversity organizations in the country. And I have two profound connections to Stanford when it comes to diversity issues. Connection number one, the first conversation that made an impression with me about diversity, particularly race, takes place in the fall of 1993 when I am a first-year student at the University of Illinois in a residence hall called Allen Hall, and the person in the front of that room leading the conversation with such concision and a compelling case and this like profound charisma to boot happened to be this guy, who doesn't remember it at all, by the way, still to this day. But in all seriousness, Brian Lowry and I were undergrads together at the University of Illinois, and I remember how illuminating he was about these issues even back then. Second connection I have with Stanford is the organization that I lead started here. In the summer of 1998, I come to an interfaith conference at Stanford University, and it's basically a bunch of senior theologians on a panel. Hilarious thing is, like, that's what I do for a living now. Like, I'm on panels for a living. But back then, when I was 22 years old, it just made me mad that this is what interfaith work was. And I thought it was going to be Dorothy Day and Malcolm X and Thich Nhat Hanh and Jane Addams, like, mobilizing together, and instead it was a bunch of senior theologians pontificating. So I stood up and I threw my fist in the air and I said, where's the young people? Where's the energy? Where's the sense of vanguard action? Why is this so boring? And a woman came up to me after I was done and said, that's a really interesting idea. Young people, social action, vanguard energy. Why are you telling other people to do it? You should build that yourself. So 26 years later, here I am, still building that thing that she told me to build. So that's the other thing that happens to me at Stanford University when it comes to diversity issues. And why does it connect to this conversation? One is because the kind of diversity organization that I lead is an organization that focuses on a word that used to be central to diversity language and is almost never used before, never used anymore, which is cooperation. Diversity is about cooperation across difference. And when I think about what a diversity infrastructure, by the way, there's DEIB, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. There's DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. There's JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, right? There's all of these things, and I could probably ride with Brian on definitions of many of these things and agree at least mostly. But what is striking to me is in the past few years, the dimension of diversity work that is almost never mentioned is the importance of cooperation across difference. And so part of what I want to put on the table here is one of the ways we ought to think about a university is what does it promise to the public? What does it promise to the public? I think part of what a university diversity infrastructure should promise to the public is we are a model of cooperation. We are a model of cooperation, and we nurture, educate, train, inspire the next generation of people who excel at cooperation across difference. So how might you test if that works? We go to the first slide. We flip the slide. I don't have the clicker. It's because I'm sitting there. Thanks, Ivan. So one of the things we like to do at my organization is just, thanks so much, is literally just, comb through major newspapers and look for stories of, frankly, places that you just expect to work, city councils, local libraries, school boards that are frankly falling apart because of diversity issues. And this can be either diversity of identity or ideology. So Ithaca, New York, high school theater falls apart over who gets which identities get cast in a particular play. And it gets so bad that they cancel the rest of the theater season. Local library in Lake Luzerne, New York. The argument gets so bad about trans story hour or drag story hour that the library just closes, permanently closes. The librarians go into shock. They have to go to the hospital and nobody reapplies for their job. City council outside of New York. The issues get so bad at the beginning of the most recent conflict in the Middle East, at the hot flash of it in late 2023, that people literally fight in the city council. Zoning stuff is not passed. New business licenses are not passed. City council in Colorado, mayor bans the Pledge of Allegiance. Volunteer fire chief threatens to quit. Right? These are just a handful of kind of, right now, pretty standard issues of division in our society. So imagine you're in Lake Luzerne, New York. Imagine you're in Ithaca, New York. Okay, imagine you're in Silverton, Colorado, and you hear that Stanford excels at diversity work. And the conflict hasn't yet erupted yet, the library's not closed. You need somebody who can help you cooperate across your difference. Not somebody with narrow mediation skills, somebody with kind of broader social psychology skills. Somebody who knows the political theory of what it means to live in a diverse society. Somebody who has lived in a diverse residence hall. Somebody who has been in classes with people of divergent ideologies and is able to listen to people from different backgrounds and encourage cooperation. One of the ways you know if your diversity infrastructure is succeeding is, can these people call you and you help them? Can you send them folks? Can you give them a handbook? Think about this for a second. If there is a very hard medical case or a very hard engineering case that somebody cannot figure out, let's say somewhere in Central California, they call you guys. They call Stanford. You guys excel at this. You have the best engineers in the world. You have the best medical teams in the world. Could you excel at cooperation across difference? Is your diversity infrastructure geared towards that? So I'm not the first person to think this. Okay, so this is actually a theory of the university that has been articulated by many folks, including some of my favorites, Catholic philosophers. So this happens to be a line by Alistair McIntyre, who's a Catholic philosopher at Notre Dame University. He says, the university is a place of constrained disagreement, of imposed participation in conflict, in which a central responsibility of higher education would be to initiate students into conflict. I just want you to think about that for a second. Day one at Stanford University, you are initiated into the conflicts that are organic to a diverse democracy. In part, that's what the faculty leaders are doing here. They are initiating you into conflict. Okay, day one at Stanford, you are told that is what this university is about. We're going to initiate you into conflict, and then we are going to help you order your arguments around that conflict. You guys are going to come out on different sides of this, but we're going to help you order your arguments around it. And we are going to be so good at this, and this is the rest of this quote, only from the university can the wider society learn how to conduct its own debates, practical or theoretical, in a rationally defensible way. The purpose of the university is to gather people of diverse identities and divergent ideologies and initiate them into conflict and excel at being able to have a community even with that diversity and divergence. And you're supposed to be so good at this that companies and hospitals and schools and city councils learn from you how to do it well. That is the reason a university exists in a diverse democracy. That's what McIntyre is saying, right? And so one of the things I get to do in my role as founder and president of Interfaith America is I present to a lot of university cabinets. And when I ask them, would you invite the CEO of the local hospital system, the superintendent of the local schools, a half a dozen prominent business people, some social workers and counselors, a couple of coaches here to witness how your campus initiates people into conflict and rationally orders arguments around that conflict and maintains a community of diversity and divergence? There is a lot of silence. There's a lot of silence. In my mind, that is a failure of the contemporary university. If you cannot do this well, you're not living up to your purpose. I think that there are 4 particular kinds of diversity and divergence you should excel at. And these are what I call the 4 aspects of pluralism. Maybe a little bit later we'll kind of get into the intellectual history of pluralism. That's how we describe our work at Interfaith America. We're an organization that believes in the paradigm of pluralism and wants that to be the kind of diversity infrastructure at universities. Very quickly, I'll go through this. One is identity pluralism. Brian spent a lot of time on this, and I actually agree with almost all of what he says. It is very important for universities to have reasonable identity pluralism. Muslims and Jews, atheists and believers, Northerners and Southerners, rich and poor, black and white, Mexican and Chinese. It is very important for a university to have all kinds of identity diversity. And I'm personally in favor of slight proactive measures, call them affirmative action, that would proactively seek to gather identity diversity? Right? I think that how far you go, et cetera, I think is an interesting question. But if you don't have identity diversity at a university, unless you're Wheaton College, let's say, right, you're dedicated to a particular identity, I think that that's an issue. I think a second kind of diversity that's very important is intellectual diversity. And I mean by that ideological diversity, but actually something more central to the academic enterprise. What is the what do you do in scholarship? What do we do in intellectual life? You gather data in rigorous ways through multiple means, everything from ethnography to surveys, and then you try different intellectual frameworks on to see what makes best sense of that data. You study the French Revolution, and then you read Thomas Paine and Edmund Burke to try to make sense of it. Which fits best? And if you are unable to rigorously gather data and to experiment with different explanatory frameworks to try to illuminate or explain that data, I just don't think you're doing intellectual life. So that's like the central muscle of what a university does, is it teaches people how to do that well. The third thing is value pluralism, most associated with the English philosopher Isaiah Berlin, who points out that core values in any society are actually oftentimes inversely correlated. So equality and freedom. You tax Elon Musk more, he's going to be mad that you have infringed upon his freedom, but then you've got tax dollars to be able to distribute to people who have a lot less money than Elon Musk, and you increase their equality or their economic standing, right? But those two things are inversely correlated. And part of what you learn at a university is how to think through those issues. And the final one is most associated with Chantal Mouffe, a European political philosopher, agonistic pluralism. And this is just the obvious thing. You have people with radically different views in a society that are actually in tension with each other. Pro-life and pro-choice. More immigration, less immigration. And figuring out how those people live together is a central part of any diverse democracy. I think you model it at a university, and I think we teach the rest of society how to do it well.
Okay, so thank you both, Deborah, for inviting me. I'm very happy and honored to be here. So this morning, as we were having breakfast with my wife told me, "Why are you doing this?" She said, you have unpopular views, and best case scenario, you're gonna get, eggs and tomatoes thrown at you. And I said, "No worries, I'm gonna throw them back." So, but yeah, I am not a DEI expert. Unlike my colleagues here, I have not read the DEI literature or the CRT literature. I'm just a professor of accounting. So this is not my expertise. But I am, a professor at the university. I'm an observer. And I think the reason I'm here is because around 2020, I reacted negatively to the things that were happening on campus, not just on Stanford, but on other campus. So I reacted negatively and publicly about the things that were happening on campus under the guise of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right? I don't like to be involved in politics, but I felt I was obliged to do so, at least in this case, for two reasons. First of all, because I noticed a very strong censorious environment where faculty and students were sort of self-censoring very much about these issues. And second, because I thought that this movement was sort of subverting the university's mission, right? So as I said, I'm not an activist. I wish I wasn't really involved at all in politics. But I do want to depoliticize the university because I think that's good for everybody. I believe the universities are wonderful institutions, but they are also very fragile. And I think we need to keep them insulated from political pressures and from market pressures, actually. So we need them. Democracy really needs them. The human spirit needs universities. But as I said, we need to keep them free and insulated from political pressures. And I thought, DEI, or at least my perception of what DEI was back in 2020, 2021, was threatening the mission of the university. So that's what I wanted to say. Now, let me also be clear. I think there is something profound and true about the DEI movement, right? That needs to be, preserved, if you will. So the emphasis on the weak and the poor is something I completely sympathize with, right? I am not a Nietzschean, and in general, the desire to create a world where everybody is appreciated, loved, included, is indeed a noble goal I share. So it's not about the goals, because we all share, or at least I share, that goal. It's very much about methods, right? We all know that good intentions are not sufficient, and that bad ideas that sound good, right, are often more harmful than openly evil agendas, okay? Now, the problem with DEI, as I see it, is that it's very hard to define. Nobody wants to really define it. And I form my views a bit empirically, right? I came to my own definition of what DEI is by observing what was going on around me on campus and elsewhere. And I think there are two aspects of DEI that are very important, I think, to the definition. The first is to recognize that DEI is an ideology, or if you want, a worldview. And I think the worldview that DEI promotes is, I think, captured in this quote by a former DEI director at the Bay Area community. I'm actually quoting from Paul's article in the New York Times, right? So there is this Bay Area, DEI director who argues the ideology is that the world is divided into two groups of people, okay? The oppressors and the oppressed. And you are part of either of those groups, depending, again, on your innate characteristics, right? Your race, your gender, your ethnicity, etc., right? I think most DEI initiatives I've seen around me share some of this ideology, right? This might be a little bit, it could be a little bit extreme, but I think this idea of intersectionality, the idea of this sort of a power struggle, where again, your membership into the oppressor category is somewhat correlated with your gender, your race, etc., is part of the DEI ideology or worldview, to not be too pejorative. The second thing is, I think DEI includes a political agenda, which is often, I think, summarized by this quote from Ibram Kendi, right? The idea that the only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination, right? So at least in my view, these are two core components of DEI. You could probably get softer versions, but I think these two things are often present in DEI. Now, why did I come to that view about DEI? Well, as I said, by observing what was going around me on campus and elsewhere, right? I saw, for example, a DEI initiative at Stanford. It's called DEI. It was fostered by Stanford administrators. And if you went into the website of this initiative, you would see a lot of ideological content, right? You would see a worldview openly embraced by the university as our worldview, right? So that was something that struck me as completely inappropriate for a university, right? The university doesn't have a worldview, right? The university is not the critics, it's the house of critics. We have views, not the university institutionally, right? I saw also a push, for example, to implement DEI training, right? Again, that struck me as contrary to the university's nature, to the university's mission. This notion that we would be trained on a worldview sounds very much like indoctrination to me, and it's not appropriate in a university. In a university, we have workshops, we have seminars, we can argue, we can debate, but we are not trained into a worldview. So that's something that struck me as inappropriate and potentially threatening, again, to the mission of the university. We saw also popping out in universities around the country this idea that to get a job, an academic job, you have to pledge allegiance to DEI through DEI statements, right? You have to sort of commit to this view in order to be considered for a faculty position, right? Many places this was happening, not necessarily Stanford. So don't take this as a criticism of Stanford. I think the things were happening in many universities around the country. At Stanford, we also have this elimination of harmful language initiative, right? Where the IT people at Stanford came up with a 14-page, speech code. Here are some examples of words that we should not be using because apparently they are offensive, right? Those that speech code included the word American because apparently the word American is offensive or could be offensive, right? So obviously it's something that was taken down very quickly once the university realized, right? But again, it's an example of the things that were happening, again, under the guise of inclusion, diversity, etc. There was also on Stanford a bias reporting system. It was an anonymous bias reporting system managed by a third party where I could actually denounce you if I thought your ideas or your speech were offensive, right? But I would do it anonymously, right? One can only imagine, right, the kind of environment that these initiatives will create. I mean, these initiatives have a long history. They've been used by the most abject and totalitarian regimes in history, right? And here we are adopting exactly the same systems as a way to generate social harmony on campus, right? Fortunately, this is something that is no longer active on Stanford. And then we have, of course, cancellations and shout-downs of judges, sometimes even promoted by DEI deans, right? So that's essentially, these are a few examples of the things that led me to believe that this movement was actually highly counterproductive, okay? So I don't know if I have more time, but I wrote in 2021 a piece with Dorian Abbott from the University of Chicago, essentially critiquing this movement. The title of the article was "The Diversity Problem on Campus." It was published in the Newsweek, and the argument was very, straightforward and simple. We said, the telos of the university, the mission of the university, the idea that the university should be committed to science and education versus social justice is being threatened, right? It feels to me that the university, has to be committed to education. It cannot be committed to social or political goals. I mean, education is already a very important social and political goal. And so I wanted to share this quote from George Steiner, the late George Steiner, an American literary critic, who asked himself, what is a university, right? And he says, it's a custodian, an engagement with the living past. It strives to advance knowledge and clarify critically the process of thought. A true university serves neither political purpose nor social programs, which are necessarily partisan and transitory, right? That's the first issue that I was trying to point out. The university needs to be insulated from politics, essentially. I also thought that DEI, the way I defined it before, was sometimes sacrificing, was sometimes, what happened? Sorry, I lost my, I was canceled. Oh, no, sorry. There you go. So I thought that sometimes these programs were sacrificing the individuals in the altar of an abstract social goal. When we tell, when Harvard tells Asians, we are not admitting you because we don't like your personality, or when they tell a Jewish student, we are not admitting you because you have some sort of privilege, I think we're doing something immoral. So my criticism was also about the morality of some of these programs or the way these programs were implemented. I thought it was also counterproductive, right? So the programs were not necessarily helping the groups that were supposed to help. On the contrary, there was some evidence that in some cases these programs were hurting people, minorities, right? They were reinforcing stereotypes. They were obviously lowering standards and so on. They were creating a divisive environment where tribalism is exacerbated, right? I am from Chile. I grew up in Chile, and I was really impressed by the diversity of American universities. Anyone who's been in Asia, South America, or Europe, or universities in Asia, South America, or Europe, would realize immediately that these universities lack a lot of diversity, right? The people there are very homogeneous, right? And when you come to the US, you see this incredible diversity of backgrounds, people, religions, races. And the reason we have that diversity is because American universities have been committed, imperfectly, but better than others, to a meritocracy, right? So the meritocracy, right, is by itself diverse, will lead to diversity, right? So that's something I wanted to point out, because I think it's very clear to a foreigner that Americans, they are not perfect. American universities are not perfect, but they're much better than other universities in the world. So the final question, and I don't know if I have time, I probably took too much time, I'm sorry about that, is whether DI is redeemable. If we wanted sort of to improve these programs, preserve what is good about them, what should we do? First of all, I obviously agree with many of the things that my colleagues here have said. We do need social norms. We all agree about that. We need to treat everybody with dignity and respect. I very much commend university leaders for encouraging that, right? For setting the tone, for emphasizing the importance of treating people with respect. But I do think that we should get rid of discrimination, right? Negative or positive. To me, they are just discrimination. We should treat everybody the same, like in admissions, when it comes to promotions, and have just a single standard. I very much agree with Brian. We are tribal, right? We tend to hang out with people who share our background. That's okay. That's probably human. But I think the university should do a better job at de-emphasizing the things that divide us, and on the contrary, emphasizing the things that unite us. We are just one race, the human race. So let's stop having, orientation based on race, and graduations based on race, and segregation of dorms. I don't think that's progress. On the contrary, I think that's actually going back in history. So, too much? Sure. I have a final comment. I think this is taken from your article, Paul, where you argue that we believe that fostering a sense of belonging among students of diverse backgrounds is a precondition for educational success. And I sort of agree with this statement, depending on exactly what we mean by fostering, and depending on exactly who's going to do the fostering and how, right? I think the devil is very much in the details. But I also would caution you, because, because this might be a bit unrealistic sometimes. Learning is very arduous, especially at the top university like Stanford, which is very competitive. Failure is possible, and there is a chance that we will not necessarily, or there is a chance we will fail, right? In the process. So that's the first thing to bear in mind. It's part of this enterprises. Failure is part of the enterprise. It's okay. People will find different options in life, and that's fine. The other thing is that I think the sense of belonging is something that cannot be sort of institutionally guaranteed. Okay, you're going to be happy. I feel that is something that emerges very organically when people admire what we do, when we work hard, when we feel we are contributing to the output of this institution, to its mission. I think that sort of sense of belonging is natural. It comes out very organically. It doesn't need to be sort of institutionally policed, so to speak. And the final thing I would mention here is that we got to be careful with infantilization. I think it can be very counterproductive, sorry. Oftentimes universities try to create these environments artificially and try to create a very sanitized environment where we have safe spaces, where we have speech codes, where we have all kinds of regulations, and there are good intentions behind them, but they do not necessarily lead to better outcomes, right? So here is this is really true, the last one. Well, I wanted to just quote Van Jones on safe spaces. I don't know if I... I think I have it here. Well, it doesn't matter, but this is just the last point I wanted to make. There you go. So this is a quote from Van Jones, one of my favorite, analysts from CNN. He says, "There are two ideas about safe spaces. One is very good, and one is a terrible idea. The idea of being physically safe on a campus, not being subjected to sexual harassment, physical abuse, or being targeted. I'm perfectly fine with that. But there is another view that is now, I think, ascendant, which I think is just a horrible view, which is that I need to be safe ideologically. I need to be safe emotionally. I just need to feel good all the time. And if someone says something that I don't like, that's a problem for everybody else, including the administration. I think that's a terrible idea for the following reason. I don't want you to be safe ideologically. I don't want you to be safe emotionally. I want you to be strong." That's it.
So I wanted to give you a chance to respond to one another, and if you have things to say in response. And then I have some questions.
Okay, I'll say something. I think there's a lot of conversation about the function and nature of the university, and I would just say that my view of the university maybe is a little bit different. I think there's optimism about what the university can and should do, which is fantastic, right? The university should be a place where we seek knowledge, agreed. The university should not be a place where we magnify differences, agreed. And the university exists in a society. The university is subject to unresolvable differences between groups that require political solutions. The university is not above the society in which it exists in. And if you think back on the university, like the idea, for example, of meritocracy, great. The society is imperfect, right? Meritocracy, I would argue that meritocracy in this country is a fiction, a useful fiction, but a fiction. And we can get into why that is if people are curious about that. But when you look back at the history of the university, think about what this university looked like 50 years ago. Who would have been in this room, right? Is that a function of meritocracy? The argument would have been yes, right? When we talk about being challenged by ideas, 100% we should be challenged by ideas. But who gets to be challenged and who gets to feel safe is a question as well. When I step into a room, or with a room when I go into meetings, because of my background, I'm often in this university the only Black person in the room, often. And is it okay if I make everyone else in that room uncomfortable? And I'd argue, no, it's not gonna be okay, because I will not be safe. I don't mean safe emotionally. I'm fine being uncomfortable emotionally. In fact, my career demanded discomfort emotionally constantly. I'm not worried about my emotional safety. I'm not worried about my physical safety. What I'm worried about is keeping my job, right? So when I'm a junior person and I have a very different opinion than everyone in the room, I have to be concerned about my job. Is that true for everyone in the room? So again, the imperfections can't be overlooked. I love the optimism about the university can be and should be, but I have a serious problem when we don't deal with what the university actually is.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Brian.
Oh, that's okay.
So I think the invisible elephant in the room is that one of the most egregious DEI violations of the last 10 years took place here. And it is actually arguably the incident that it's at Stanford Law School. Everybody knows it. And it is arguably one of the 2 or 3 moments that turned the corner on the DEI debate. Right? So I don't want to get, I'm not going to use names. My intention is not to get personal here, but I think it is important to point out what happened, which is that at Stanford, and why so many people considered it egregious. At Stanford Law School, a federal judge was brought to the law school to speak. This is about 3 years ago. And a group of Stanford law students shouted the judge down with language like, I hope your daughter gets raped. Okay, so, and the person who ran DEI for the law school, again, all of this is public, so I'm not, again, this is my point here is not to cast aspersion on a great university. It is simply to say that one of the 3 or 4 most important cases that turns the public debate happens here a couple of years ago, and it's important to just unlayer it a little bit, right? The person who runs DEI for the law school stands up and basically says, I agree with the students who are doing this. Yes, you have free speech rights, but I agree with the students because they feel oppressed by your presence. And the language of oppression or victimization is actually used in an email that individual sends to the dean of the law school earlier, which is highlighted by Connor Friedersdorf in The Atlantic. So why is this egregious? Okay, number one, if you're at a law school, you are being trained to argue cases before a judge. So you are violating a professional standard. You're like, I don't want to be good at what you are training me to do. I don't want to argue cases before this judge, but it's like being a quarterback and not wanting to have a defense. Like, this is the game, this is what you do, right? I don't want to be good at this, number one. Number two, just the kind of, the standards of decorum that were violated, okay? That's obvious, okay? But here's the third thing. The language of being oppressed being applied to Stanford law students, just put that in your pipe and smoke it for a second. In a nation of 330 million people, where the median household income is $80,000 a year, okay, in Stanford law, you're paying at least $100,000. In a nation where 2/3 of the people don't have a college degree, where fewer than 10% have a graduate degree, and way fewer than 1% go to any place close to Stanford Law School, the language of oppression is being used as a reason on behalf of Stanford law students to act in a manner that is both a violation of the profession and any standard of human conduct. You cannot be the elite, disdain other people, and call yourself a victim. Because next time it won't be an election, it will be a set of pitchforks.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, the details of this, I mean, we could dispute the details, but here's the bigger question. The fact that happened does not at all explain why it turned the corner, because things happen all the time. Like, for example, there's at the business school, some professor wrote an essay that said some of my students don't belong here, and explicitly talking about black students. Nothing happened to him, no corner was turned. Like, the idea that there are examples that people use politically effectively provides no evidence for anything, in my opinion. And so, because I could point out all kinds of examples of egregious racism and sexism that occurs at many universities, and there's not a political movement that then starts up that drives that out. That just doesn't happen all the time. So my point is not about like, was it egregious? That to me is not even the point. Like, if it wasn't, irrelevant. What I would argue is that, again, these are all political movements. For example, CRT, people don't even know what CRT is, and they use it as a political cudgel. That's not about anything. People don't even understand CRT, because it doesn't matter. These are political arguments. These are political arguments, and when I have a problem, to the extent I had a problem with the law students, here's my problem with the law school students. They were ineffective. That's my problem. My problem wasn't they're being loud or being disruptive, because it also was the case that judge was there on purpose to provoke that and did things in that moment to provoke it. That's also a part of the public record. But the point I'd have is, like, if you're interested in change, be strategic about producing the change. This is where I have a problem with them. What do you care about? Do you care about looking good? Do you care about being virtuous? Or do you care about producing change? I don't care that they weren't like cordial. I don't care that they were law school students and weren't following the law. I don't care about any of that. I care they weren't effective. So I have a problem with them too. Change something. Don't just shout. Like, care about something.
So maybe this is a good place for me to, Yvonne, did you want to get in? Okay. So I guess one of the issues that we hear a lot about with DEI, so Brian, you were saying, like, there's a fact of diversity. There's also a fact of inequality. So the question is, how do you link those things? And do you link them? And are there ways of linking them that are counterproductive, don't work very well? So that's one, and you made the argument, your argument here was it wasn't effective. But there's also an important value that I think is not just a effectiveness value, which is might does not make right. That is you're right, that history changes in part because of force and might, but we also believe might doesn't make right. We have to be right, and if we think we have to be right, we have to listen, we have to argue, we have to try to convince, knowing that the world is not a seminar, but it's really important that there are values that are orienting us. And then when we think about this relation between inequality and diversity, we have to be careful that we're not losing a moral thread in the way that we're setting up the relation. So, and this is to all of you, but it's particularly to you because you were challenging the civility part. Mm-hmm. And of course, I agree. Civility by itself is not you'd have to have a weird view of history to think that was the most effective way of making change. But it is really important for us as people to relate to one another, right, as reasons matter. And that.
Are you a moral philosopher?
I am a philosopher, so.
All right.
Speaking to the psychologist who's like, who cares about reason?
So here's the thing. Well, first, inequality is obviously a fact, right? And inequality is, to say is it connected to diversity, I think is in some sense the wrong question, because inequality, if we're talking about it as groups, then it creates diversity. It's not connected to it, but you could argue it produces it, right? And this is an argument, if you want to talk about, like, as an argument, race or class, these things are produced by the inequality. They're not not tied to it, if that makes sense. I think when you start to assume that any of these dimensions are, well, there's one exception, but I'm gonna put that aside for now. Any of these things are innate, and then you tie the equality to some innate feature of what you perceive to be some innate feature of humanity, there's a problem, I think. I think when you create a hierarchy of inequalities, that is a problem that's tied to particular groups. I think when you confuse a principled stand against inequality with a self-interest or a group interest, I think that's problematic. There are all sorts of ways that you can tie inequality to diversity, I think, create serious problems. And I think when I have a problem with DE&I initiatives or things that are labeled as DE&I initiatives, or the behaviors as Ibu was describing of those students, I do have a problem because and this is where I think you and I will agree, I have a problem when people confuse self-interest with principle. Right? Those are not the same. If you see yourself as oppressed and then are trying to make an argument for yourself and make that argument as an argument of a principled argument for equality or equity, I don't know that that is always the case. And I think that is problematic. And I think you can see this when you argue, like, are you making that argument as forcefully for others? And are you more interested in the value you get from making the argument than for the change that you produce? And this is where I go to effectiveness. I think that suggests a problem.
So I want to spend a second on the term oppressed, right? Because I think that Ivan, am I pronouncing that correctly? Okay, Ivan, where he is absolutely right is the manner in which the identities that have mattered the most on many college campuses as a result of DEI initiatives of the last 10 years has been oppressor and oppressed. Okay, so one of the reasons I dislike this so much, I'm going to give you 2 or 3 reasons for this, and then I'll turn it over to Ivan. One of the reasons I dislike this so much is because the diversity work that we do at Interfaith America, it begins with understanding that identities are holy, that particularity matters first. That's actually part of the intellectual tradition of cultural pluralism, as it was articulated by Horace Callan and Elaine Locke in the early 20th century. It's a fascinating history. Your particular identity really matters, right? So if the most important categories are oppressor and oppressed, and you're talking, say, Muslim identity, then what matters about you is that you're a victim of Islamophobia and not inspired by Islam. And I think that that's a defilement, right? I think that long after Islamophobia goes away, Islam will still exist, and it will still be inspiring hundreds of millions, if not billions of people. Long after anti-Semitism goes away, Judaism will still exist and it will be inspiring tens of millions of people, right? So you begin with particularity, and you recognize that there are racism, homophobia, et cetera, all kinds of things that affect people's particularity, but a Muslim is not principally a victim of Islamophobia. A Muslim is principally somebody inspired by Islam. So that's point number 1. I dislike how the oppressor-oppressed framework superimposes and actually what I think is deforms identity. Point number 2, with relation to the Stanford Law School incident. The function of claiming the identity oppressed is the ability to say, I can do to you things that are beyond the pale in most forms of human conduct. Because I am oppressed, I can call you names, I can shout at you, I can say things about you, I can harass you in ways that I could not do if I did not claim that identity. Okay? The problem, there's a lot of problems with this. One problem is, forget the fact that we live in a nation of 330 million people. We live in a world of 8 billion people, of which half of which live on an income of under $10.50 a day. Right? So whatever you think you can do to somebody else by claiming the category oppressed, just imagine what people can do to you. Or do you just disappear the rest of the world? Do you disappear the rest of the nation that doesn't have a college degree? Right? And this, I think, is one of my for me, my most important points at a place like Stanford is, in many segments of your life, not all, but in many segments of your life, the single most important identity you will have is Stanford graduate. It will open doors, it will make connections, it will be a magic pass. And in a nation in which 2/3 of people don't graduate from college, and there are 2,500 colleges and universities, you didn't just accidentally drop into Palo Alto. You chose this privilege. You worked your butts off for it. So now what are you going to do with it? Right? And I think that this privilege has as a corresponding dimension a massive responsibility. A massive responsibility, because the advantages that accrue to having an elite college degree are just disproportionate, massively disproportionate. And guess what? Like, people are onto it now. The custodian is listening into the conversation, and they're like, that 20-year-old is saying, what? If you don't commit yourself to some serious notion of the of cooperation across difference for the uplift of others as a result of having the identity of Stanford grad, like I'm telling you, like we are heading into big problems.
Can I just add to that? I think that's right, but I don't think Stanford is going to be most people's most important identity, because I think identity is how you define yourself and how your community defines you. I don't think that'll be true for most of you, but I completely agree that it's a privilege. And the question is, like, what do you do with that privilege? And I also agree that it's like serve in service of others is what I think. I think that we are here because society allows us to be here. Now, that privilege doesn't undermine the costs that you might have bear to get here. They don't make those all go away. That's just not true. And it is the case that it will open incredible doors for you. That is 100% true. And the question is, what responsibility do you have for that? I think that's the real question. What is the responsibility that you feel for having this privilege? Not do you define yourself by this privilege, or do others define you by this privilege? Maybe others will, maybe they won't, but you almost certainly do have some responsibility because society has allowed you to be here. And this is where I'll go back to like my issue with meritocracy. Like most of us have had incredible privileges that have allowed us to be here. The idea that you deserve this seat more than the 300 other people that could have equivalently been in that seat, to me, is ludicrous. And I feel that way about myself, right? The amount of people in this world who are capable, smart, incredible, who just wasn't born, and they always weren't born in the right place, should humble all of us. And so given that privilege, what is your responsibility to the communities you exist in and to the broader world? I think that is the right question.
So I'd like to return, Brian, to your opening statement. There's an ambiguity there, and which way it's resolved, I think, would reduce or increase the tension between your position and the other two we've heard. First of all, I think you're absolutely right that most social change has happened through activism, by changing behavior and not through discourse, although discourse plays a role there. But the question is whose role on campus the activism is. My own view is that the activism belongs to students, to faculty, to people, to various activists, but not to the university. That is, the university, you're quite right, pursues its own mission, and changes have happened within the university or to the university. But that at a time like this, or going back to last year when there were many demonstrations on campus, it was perfectly appropriate for students to be protesting with the goal of changing people's behavior with respect to what's going on in Israel and Gaza. That was for the students and for faculty to write about it or teach about it. But the university's role, and this is where I come back to what I think Ibu says, is not to be an activist, but to be a play. I loved Yvonne's quote from Alistair McIntyre, to be a place where this can take place, and especially to do what the university does best, which is to promote discourse, to allow discourse to happen freely. When the university becomes an activist, the issue for me, Brian, is not just whether it's successful or not, it's the unintended harmful consequences of the university becoming an activist, the effect that it has on academic freedom and on students' freedom of speech. And your point about just wanting your job, when the university becomes activist and takes a strong position, this is not going to happen at Stanford, but it's happening, for example, at California community colleges. When the university takes a particular position, it's up, the students involved in discussing can say who's an oppressor and who's being oppressed. I agree with Ibu, it's not a very good discourse. That's up to the students. When the university decides who's the oppressed and who's the oppressor, that then chills people's speech. So at California community colleges, which has an official position with respect to social justice, you mentioned being worried about your job. I think faculty members who take a different position in their scholarship or teaching are at risk there. So for me, it's just a matter of role. I think what you describe as the way social change happens is absolutely right, but the university should not be a player in that. The university should be the place where that can happen.
Yeah, so good luck to the university in that. It's failed thus far and will continue to fail. That's my position, and I'll explain that in a second. I do not think the university should be making DE&I statements. No, I'll just say that. That's a simple one. But the idea that the university is not activist, to me, is on its face false. As an example, Deborah could not have been sitting here as a dean, what, 50 years ago, maybe less than that. 100 years ago, she wouldn't have been on this stage. And her presence here changes things. That's the university being activist. The university has allowed for people like me to come and do research that would not have existed before people like me were allowed in. That's the university being activist. The university has produced and is going to produce all these students. Many of them, again, as I said before, would not have been in this room. And doors will be opened. They will be in halls of power. That will shift the society. That is activist. The university does not exist separate from the rest of society. There's no such thing as an apolitical actor in a political system of human beings. I just think that's just on its face not possible. Now, if what you mean is, are they going to take a stand on a contemporary argument right now? No, but I think it's a mistake not to see the constant activism of the university in shaping the way society functions. And again, this is to me why people misunderstand what the university actually does. What the university actually does, a university like Stanford, is put a print on people's heads, teaches them some things true, and then sends them out into the world to change how the world operates. That's what we do. And I think now, should we do that? I don't know about should. I'm just telling you what I believe actually happens. Like, these people are going to go out into the world and do stuff. They're going to be able to go out in the world and do stuff because they came here, because we let them in. The decisions we make about who we let in shifts how the world operates.
So, but there is a response to the argument you just made, which is there are some things that are intrinsic to the mission of the university, which is the production of knowledge and the seeking of truth and the exclusion of women or racial minorities, or that's incompatible on its face with the pursuit of that mission. And so, of course, the university is going to be activists in defense of its own mission and goals. It can't be neutral about knowledge. We are not in the business of saying knowledge, that's just one idea, like we're not really going to defend it. In the same way, I think there are other things that follow from that commitment that fall within our justified activism. But the idea that we should be an activist on things that are not really directly related to the mission of producing knowledge and education, I want to hear an argument about that.
Okay, let me respond to this.
And then we should open
Yeah, we should open it. I'm gonna, as I will, and I always do, push back on this, as I'm sure you are not surprised by. There was a world in which you would say that knowledge is, and I think there are many people who still believe this, knowledge is agnostic to identity, isn't it? Why do we need women? Why do we need people of color? Why do we need people of different faiths to generate knowledge? It's agnostic. And the university certainly held that position. So even your claim that we need
we were wrong. We were wrong a lot.
So then, and so
you
then
can be wrong, and
right,
and that's another reason to worry about institutional orthodoxy, is because we are often wrong.
Right, and what I'm going to say is this, and I think we could be wrong right now, and the things that we think of as activism in this moment could be inherently tied to the production of knowledge, and we don't know. In which case, the university will continue to be activist in ways that it will, after the fact, ascribe to the production of knowledge.
So let me just jump in
She's
here.
also the dean that gives me money, so I appreciate that too.
So I'm. Let me just try a different frame here, right? Which is the question: what does the university seek to excel at? What does the university seek to excel at? And by the way, I don't actually think the world only changes through activism. I don't know if Sergey Brin and whoever the other Google's guy's name was were activists, but they changed the world. And Stanford plays a major role in that because they learn how to do something really well here. So I think the most important question for a university, I think, maybe for any institution, is what do you look to be good at? So my suggestion is the canopy that you look to be good at is called pluralism. And there is the standard understanding of pluralism in intellectual life is the rigorous gathering of data and the use of different explanatory frameworks to try to make sense of that data. That is like standard academic stuff. That is part of what you look to be good at. By the way, any dogma is in opposition to that standard academic way of doing things, because a dogma is there's a single explanatory framework, and you literally reduce your data to fit into that framework, or you twist it, right? So pluralism number one is intellectual pluralism. Pluralism number two is identity pluralism. And you do seek to have a diversity of identities, and you seek to excel at cooperation across difference. So my idea of what a DEI infrastructure should look like is people who excel at cooperation across difference, right? That is very different than people who excel at categorizing people as oppressed and oppressor. I think part three of pluralism, this is a little bit of a review, is people who are very good at weighing the diverse values that make up a society. How do we think about equality and freedom? And part four is, how do you get people who oppose each other to live together? How do you get people who, so I think that's it. What do you seek to excel at? And in that excelling, we change the world. Right? I don't think it's just activists who change the world.
I just wanted to sort of echo what Deborah said. There are many organizations and NGOs that can be devoted to social justice or social goals. There's only one institution that can be devoted to science and education, and that's the university. And I think our commitment to that mission is a very important goal. Now, if you want to call that activism, then I'm in favor of university activism. But I don't think that's activism. There is something very different to sort of the commitment of the university to this mission and to the excellence in this mission, which is going to lead to a lot of progress, social progress, including the ones that Brian mentioned, right? Political and social. But for that, we need to preserve the mission. We need to preserve, insulate, as I said before, the university from orthodoxies and from political influences and from market influences. So I think that's really crucial. And I think in the last 4 years, we haven't been doing that. There was a bit of I think a distortion in the mission of the university. There was censorship, there was an orthodoxy. You know, just to give you an example of how subtle the orthodoxy could be, this is something that a friend of mine told me. He's a professor at a different university, and he told me that he went to a meeting with faculty from that university, and then the dean said, well, in this university, we are committed to open inquiry and free speech. But DEI is not a matter of free speech, it's a matter of decency. That's how he started the university. He started the meeting, right? Obviously, that was a subtle way to essentially shut you down if you disagreed about this logic of the oppressor and the oppressed, right? It's like the university saying to everybody, well, for now, we are going to adopt a certain worldview, maybe the worldview of Milton Friedman. We're going to all think that capitalism is great and it's the solution to our problems. Or we are going to endorse the catechism of the Catholic Church. That would be outrageous. We would be very unhappy. And I think the university has been doing something like that with its institutional endorsement of sort of the DI ideology. So I think that's a problem, and that impoverishes everybody in the university, and at the end, I think it impoverishes the country as a whole.
Great. I want to open it up now to the audience. So don't hesitate, come up with your questions, your provocations, your challenges.
Can I go first? Hi, everyone. My name is Hayne. I'm a new transfer student here in undergrad. So during the new student orientation, I overheard a comment from a student saying that I wish this school would only accept those who deserve to be here. not those who use their diversity card. And as a first-gen low-income, formerly unhoused, and non-traditional transfer student from a community college, my background feels very rare in this institution, especially compared to those who were bred with the privilege of always knowing the fact that they belonged in places like this. And I worked tremendously hard to be here today, but I also know that I am not alone. There are so many others who exactly equally to be here work exactly hard as and deserve the same opportunity. And returning to higher education after a 12-year gap, I realized that this achievement is not just mine. And I didn't get here because I'm somehow really exceptional or uniquely gifted. I got here because of the sacrifice and the support of my community, people who drove public buses, organized food drives, and when we didn't have enough food to eat, and fought for the better future for all of us. So my success here is a collective one and is built on the hard work of those who helped me along the way. But when I hear the rhetoric like all lives matter or all human bred, I have a question for Professor Marinovic. Do you really believe that all lives are treated equally from the start? And do you really think that the playing field is even for everyone here? And do you really think that diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts are divisive? Or political, then how do you explain the systemic barriers that persist for so many of us here? And how do you reconcile the idea of meritocracy when so many of us, including myself, had to start from the very bottom of the place of disadvantage? And do you really believe that opportunity should be reserved for those who never had to fight for themselves?
So yeah, first of all, I commend you for your effort. I'm sure you deserve to be here. I'm not questioning that, and I don't think everybody has the same opportunities. I do think we all should fight so people have those opportunities. What I would question are some initiatives to essentially engage in a bit of a social engineering sometimes. That do not even lead or improve or benefit the people we are supposedly helping. There are inequalities, but maybe the way to address these inequalities is, for example, to improve K through 12 education. If you bring someone who doesn't have the preparation to Stanford, and I'm not saying that's your case, obviously, but if you engage in a very, very artificial form of I would call it social engineering, you may actually setting somebody up for failure, right? And it happens, and there is literature about that. There is empirical literature showing, for example, that some of the people who supposedly are benefiting from affirmative action programs end up failing because they go to universities that maybe they were not really prepared for, and or to maybe areas and professions that and end up in professions that maybe were not their top professions. Maybe they started doing engineering. They couldn't, they couldn't sort of succeed in those careers, and then they end up dropping from those professions into maybe lower or easier professions that maybe don't pay off. So I guess my answer is, I am a bit skeptical that these programs necessarily help the people they are supposed to help, right? That would be my view.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I thought this was one of the more engaged conversations involved, so I appreciate all you guys' thoughts. I have two questions. I'm also a transfer student from a California community college. I know there was a lot of talk about that, so that's the second part of our second question. My first question, though, is it kind of seemed like Mr. Lowry in the beginning was talking about how there's a misconception of the definition of DEI, and I feel like that kind of played out in this entire conversation. Mr. Lowry talked about it's kind of the principle of social justice and equality, or fighting for those principles, and then we had Mr. Patel talking about how it's about cooperation, and then Mr. Marinovic talking about how it's a worldview. So it's like you got three different principles, and they all seem malaligned. So I wanted to see if any of you were able to come to some kind of agreement in principle with what DEI actually is, because I don't want to leave with three different principles. I want to see what you guys all have in common.
Here's what I would say. I think you can go at different levels, right? So what I'm talking about is an ideal. And I also get there are initiatives, specific initiatives that people tie to that label. And I think Yvonne is talking about some specific initiatives, right? So it's hard to name them all, but I think that he's more talking about particular things. I don't think he's opposed to the ideal. I think it's like how we would do it. What's the right way to think about it? I think as a worldview, I don't know that as a worldview, I think what he's, and he can speak for himself, but I'm just going to try to bring it together a little bit. I think what he has in mind is how these things are implemented and the psychology associated with it for the people that are implementing it and the people who see themselves as affected by it. So the law school students, maybe even the university. So at that level, how not just what the particular initiatives are, which is what Yvonne is talking about, but the thinking about how we should achieve the higher goal and what's your worldview associated with that. And I was talking initially about the higher goal. So I think my sense is that we all agree at the high level. I'm talking about, again, they can disagree, but I get the sense that everyone agrees at the high level that we should live in a diverse society where everyone is respected. Everyone has opportunities. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. Then there's like, how do you conceptualize the way an institution or a people, however they define themselves, should think about that? And I think we might have some disagreement there. I think you get down to the particular initiative, the specific thing that is going to be done. I think we have disagreement there. So that's how I would think about, and that's how I would make sense of the conversation.
Did you have a question about?
I had one more quick question. Say it again?
I thought you had a point about community college.
Yeah. I have one quick question. And so my second question is, I was involved in a bias education response team at my community college. And so when Mr. Marinovic was talking about how it reflects totalitarian, systems of authoritarianism, I was like, oh shoot, I hope I'm not being a part of authoritarian, committees. And I seriously want to know, what are ways or alternatives to these bias education response teams where things like Title IX have such high limitations as to what qualifies, where you need some system to at least account for these microaggressions and small injustices that are happening every day and disproportionately affecting people who aren't privileged in society and who these programs aren't being created for?
Yeah. So I'm not necessarily against, holding people accountable and having ways to resolve these frictions. I am actually against a system that, first of all, an anonymous system where you are supposed to anonymously denounce your peers, your faculty, without them being able to defend themselves. So I actually question very much the anonymity because it's depriving someone from due process. I think that's very anti-liberal. So first of all, let's remove the anonymity aspect if you want. I also don't quite like the notion of microaggressions, because this notion that I can offend you unintentionally, it happens. Of course, human beings, they always offend each other, but it's part of human interaction. So why don't we sort of give the benefit of the doubt, assume good intentions, and if there are frictions, we resolve them, but we move forward. So this notion that we are in some sort of war against each other, and that we should sort of penalize people even for offenses they did not intend to commit, right? So there is a difference between, giving offense and taking offense. So that's, something that I would want you to bear in mind. Let's give the benefit of the doubt. Let's give people the benefit of the doubt, and let's realize that human interactions are not frictionless. There is always, frictions, but we can resolve them if we have sort of goodwill and assume good intentions. And finally, again, going back to the issue of bias reporting systems, I don't think that's a system the university should be promoting. It's not a system that is going to lead to more social harmony, probably to the opposite, right? Among other things, it's going to also chill speech. If you feel that people are policing you and when you are in the classroom because of the things you say, because of the jokes you made, that's not the environment where you probably want to be in, right? So there are alternative ways to deal, again, with the things you are worried about, but anonymous bias reporting system should not be part of that.
Thank you.
Hi all, thank you for your argument. This was a really interesting week. My name is Puali'i. I'm Native Hawaiian from Hawaii. And as much as I disagreed with a lot that was said, as somebody who lived in a Native-themed dorm, works at the Native American Cultural Center, I also work with R&DE as a cultural dining ambassador to literally DEI. Like, that's basically, I get paid to DEI. And as much as I disagree with all that, I think what Brian said stuck with me the most. So I'm using this opportunity to ask Brian and Abu, what do you think are actions that students like myself who are interested in coalition building, cooperation, and intercommunication, what should we do to, because I kind of agree, like, discourse is awesome and civility is great, but action is what matters. And also, if any of you are interested in action, feel free to email me. My name is Puali'i, Pualii. It will pop up on Instagram and email, okay? Pero, what do you think we should do as students, or a student like myself, to increase this cooperation among diverse perspectives and literally create action at this university?
A couple things. Thank you for all the questions. So I want to address your question directly, and then I just want to make a quick comment about kind of the series of questions. So one of the things I love about business school education, we're at a business school right now, is it's the case study method, right? Which is basically, here's a situation at a company, what would you do if you were the leader? What would you do if you were in charge? So my strong suggestion for how a diversity infrastructure should function, let me say again, I think a diversity infrastructure at a university is super important, because one of the key, the thing that holds a diverse democracy together is cooperation. Our diverse democracy is falling apart when it comes to that. And I think universities should be places that model cooperation and that educate a set of people who excel at that. And not in a narrow mediation type way, but in a, can this civic institution, can this little league hold together with Ukrainians and Russians, with Jews and Palestinians, with black and white, with college educated and non-college educated, right? So I think one of the kinds of things that your effort could do is to say, can we take a couple of cases? Take, for example, UCSF, an hour up the road, right? A medical center where a year ago there's a New York Times piece saying that doctors at UCSF are not only not operating with each other, they are not talking to each other. They are reporting each other using the language invented at universities, microaggression, feeling unsafe, not just over a disagreement on what's happening in the Middle East, but over what should be allowed as registering an opinion on that. Can you wear a Palestinian flag or an Israeli flag? Can you participate in a protest in your lunch hour, right? So what if the D&I function, your group here at Stanford gathered and said, what if they called us? What if the hospital said, you know what? We cannot have a hospital where nurses and doctors aren't working together. Just imagine that. Just imagine like rolling in there for an appendectomy one day and them saying, we can't do this. Sorry, our doctors aren't working together. Could you send a team of people to help that hospital get back on track? That's the kind of thing that I think a diversity infrastructure should be focused on. By the way, there's academic literatures around this, like a significant amount of social psychology as how do you create environments where people cooperate across difference, right? A significant amount of political theory in America is how do you have a healthy, diverse democracy? So that's the kind of thing I think that a diversity infrastructure should focus on. The question that I want to make that's kind of a meta question vis-a-vis the last three questions, right? Each of you came up and you registered an identity, right? I am a Delta. You located yourself in an identity, perfectly reasonable, right? And one of the things you highlight is where you stand vis-a-vis other people in the Stanford community. A lot of people in the Stanford community, their principal concern is there snow in Aspen in the winter? Honestly, right? Honestly, right? Like, is it going to rain in the Bahamas when I go for spring break? Okay. I get that. I get that it's like, dude, this is crazy. Like, do you know where I go home to? Okay. This is crazy. Part of what I want to have you consider and wonder is, what does the rest of the country think about you once they know you're at Stanford? And what I think, and I've learned in the last 12 years of American political life, is the distance between two Stanford students. There may be exceptions to this. Like, if you're homeless or food insecure, like, you're an exception. I just want to say, okay? But the distance between two Stanford students is probably a lot smaller than the distance between the median American who does not have a college degree and a Stanford grad. And part of what I want to put on the table for you to consider is, when you think of your diversity initiatives, are you mostly thinking about the relationship between Stanford students? In which case you're talking about an infinitesimal part of the population. Or are you thinking about your responsibilities to the nation? My suggestion is you think about the second. I think it is the more ethical thing to do personally. That's an interesting conversation. But just politically speaking, I'm telling you, man, like, the nation is onto us. They're like, are you kidding me, with everything that accrues to having a college degree? And they disdain us? And they call themselves victims? This is over. It's over.
So we're probably only going to be able to take one more question. And if we could put up the poll question while the last question is being asked. And do you want
just a quick
Yeah.
response here. I think my view of humanity is, I don't know if it's dark, but it's pretty simple. People do things they feel like benefit them and theirs. If you want to change people's behavior, change what they perceive to benefit them and theirs. Social theory is clear on this. Political science is clear on this. You look at, like, the extension of the franchise, for example, looks to be a function of concerns about their people's own outcomes. When the costs of not extending the franchise outweighs the cost of extending the franchise is extended. It's not, there's very little evidence that people are driven by abstract goods. That's what I would say. Like, no, I can have a discussion with her later. But so what I would say is, if you want to think about how to change the incentives that people care about. Now, what those incentives are might vary from situation to situation. You want to change people's behavior, change the incentives. An economist will be happy with me.
Okay, so the poll, everybody's filling out the poll, and last question.
My question is for Professor Lurie. With regards to the law school incident, you mentioned that your primary issue with it was that it wasn't effective, as opposed to it being disruptive or people shouting. I guess my main objection to the incident, I guess this was expressed in then Dean Martinez's memo following as well, is that the shoutdowns were wrong because it rested on the assumption that certain ideas are harmful and threatens the inclusivity of the law school community, and that the best way to approach a situation like that is to deplatform the speaker, to make sure the speaker doesn't speak, and with the aim of protecting the inclusiveness and diversity and the equity of the community. I guess, what do you think about that objection that's been raised?
This idea that, like, everybody should have a chance to speak, nonsense. The university is all about keeping people from speaking. The university does this all the time. Here's what I mean. There's no flat earther who's going to get an appointment in any department in this university. Not going to happen. It's not going to happen. There's all kinds of things that we deem like in not aligned with the current beliefs such that they should not exist here because knowledge. Sure, I understand, because knowledge. And I think there's also this view that there's like before recently, everything was great, as if the status quo is not also silencing people. There are things when I got here in 2002, there are things I would never have said in front of the classroom with people long before any DEI anything. I would have never said it. So this idea that somehow now all of a sudden DEI has come in and kept people from speaking, where before we had this open, people could talk, nobody was deeming the platform, canceling. No, it's just when the status quo cancels you, it doesn't require anything.
This cat was a federal judge at a law school.
Who
It's not some
cares?
random dude.
Who cares? I don't care where you are. Here's the thing, like, I don't care. You know what I care about? I care about what you believe in making things work. I don't care what your name is. I don't care what your degree is. I don't care about any of that.
But if you're graduating from a law school, you're going to be hopefully arguing before federal judges. And so it is part of being good at what you do.
No. Here's the thing. What's part of being what you good is
And
what you
also-
do is like winning arguments. And this is what I mean about the politics. I don't know why we're not serious about politics. Politics is power. Politics is like when we cannot agree, who wins? And that is a law. I don't care. We have these highfalutin ideals. Fantastic. I hope we achieve them. We are not there yet. Think about what's happening in this country right now. Is it about debate? Is that what's going to win the day? Like, I just have a really, really hard time with this reliance on like these ideals and this optimism when what's happening on the ground is politics. What's happening on the ground is power. And what I care about is learning how to use it and I hope in service of values that we should all carry. Now, there are people who disagree with me on all certain kind of values. They're out there right now trying to politically beat me. And I'm not confused about that. And I'm not gonna have some like, I'm not gonna be like, what we should do is make sure everyone can talk and be heard. No, like that is when we assume, at some point we assume that we share some basic values. At that point, 100%. There should be disagreement. But the idea that prior to whatever it was, 2015, that we were living in this I don't know, politically free, open inquiry environment, that's simply because the dominance was such that there was no challenge. You couldn't challenge it, nothing else.
Yeah, no, just two quick comments. So first of all, you may not care, Brian, but I wouldn't call it inclusive then, right? So if shouting down a judge, a federal judge, is something you don't care, that's fine, but I wouldn't call it inclusive. And I also very fully reject this notion that everything is about selfishness or power. I do think we are surrounded by people who have generously given their lives to different causes. I'm sure you do this. We are surrounded by institutions and by a history that is messy, but actually proves that there is much more than power and selfishness. I think that's very obvious and self-evident in the US and in many other countries. I'm not saying it's perfect, the history, but this notion that everything is power or selfishness is something I reject.
I'm going to repeat one of my refrains of this, right? If you're claiming a status that allows you to treat people in a way that is beyond like what we think of as like standard conduct, think about, we live in a world of 8 billion people, okay? Think about how you live, what your evening is gonna look like, and what the evening of a leprous beggar child in India is gonna look like. And just think about the billions of people who could treat you a particular way. I mean, this is part of the thing at a place like Stanford, right? If you claim an identity that allows you to treat people in a particular way, think about how other people can treat you based on their identities.
Let me just say one thing about that really quickly, that it's not that people claim depression allowed people to treat them that way and that people who have power don't. Mostly in history, it's that people who have power treat other people whatever way they like. That's what it is.
Who do you think you are? Who do we think we are?
I know, understand that, but I'm saying that this is where the inclusion exists too. that human beings have, this is the nature of things. I'm
So-
just saying, this is the nature of things.
So
that
I want to
powerful
say
people do. I'm
a
included.
couple of things to wrap this up today. The interplay between power, politics, and ideals is really important, and it turns on both value questions and on empirical questions, which we have some disagreements about, and hopefully productive disagreements about. I do want to point out that despite the disagreements, you heard on a very, very high level of abstraction, a lot of commonality about the values of creating a respectful and inclusive community. Disagreement about how you do that and what's the right way to go about doing that, but a lot of shared ideals. And one of the things we often do in the context of disagreement is try to figure out, if we disagree on a lot of things, are there higher levels of abstraction? Now, maybe they're not that powerful, those higher levels of abstraction, but we should get some reassurance from the fact that there's a lot of agreement at a very high level. Please join me in thanking our speakers for a really interesting discussion.
Thank you.